all and warm greetings. Welcome all for another session for Friday Waters Thesis Club. The idea for Friday Waters is to wet the Fridays with fun-filled and yet fruitful activities for the future generation. Friday Waters at Water Talkies, book reading, thesis club, and water arts. Focus of Water Thesis Club is on bringing the student scholars who have done or are doing a thesis alias research on water matters to the session in order to discuss with them the making of the thesis research and the issues around the subject covered. I am Ekta Gupta, the moderator for today's Thesis Club session. I am joined by Professor Sonia Gupta, professor at Northeastern University, as a discussant for today's Thesis Club session. For today's session, we have Vaishali Kushwaha to share her research on unraveling institutional disarrangements in urban water governance using social network analysis. Vaishali is a water policy planning and governance scholar. She is currently pursuing a mid-career Ph.D. in public policy at Northeastern University. Her discussions focus on analyzing urban water management challenges in India using innovative transdisciplinary approaches. She is proponent of ecological economics, system thinking, and applies diverse range of methods, including dynamic modeling, network science, data analytics, benchmarking, and program evaluation in her applied research work. She is also an instructor and a digital integration teaching initiative fellow at Policy School. She launched Pani Ka Manchitra Water Map, a digital story map initiative to increase awareness on where cities get their water from. Water Map of Ahmedabad, India is the first in the series. Vaishali has received her MPA from the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, National University of Singapore, and an MS in Environmental Engineering from Texas A&M University. She also has over a decade of professional experience working in academia, think tanks, civil society, and consulting across India, Singapore, and the US. Welcome again, Vaishali Kushwaha. Now I invite Sonia to talk the session further with her.
Yes, thanks, Ekta. And a very, very warm welcome, Vaishali, to this session of Thesis Club of Friday Waters. Thanks for sharing your presentation with us already. And may I say that what a neat and tight format you have used to convey an extremely challenging task that you have sought out for yourself. So now the screen is all yours for the next 25 minutes.
So thank you, Mansi, for inviting me to share my work. And thank you, Sonia, for leading discussion, and Ekta for moderating the session. It's a privilege to present my research at W4W session, led by some formidable women experts. But before I get into the depths of my presentation, I want to first apologize for my sore throat, and second, give you a brief context of my work. So as part of my ongoing PhD at Northeastern University Policy School, I'm using a 3-paper approach for my dissertation. The first paper focuses on water policy, the second on water planning and management, and the third on water governance. Today, I will be sharing my third paper that focuses on analyzing institutional structure of urban water governance using an innovative approach called the social network analysis. I use Ahmedabad as my case study for this research. However, the approach and the methodology can be applied to study any other city as well. In today's presentation, I will quickly skim through the introduction part because I believe everyone on this forum is a water expert and is very well aware of the challenges that India faces. And I will dive deeper into the research objectives, methodology, results, and discussion. So most of us in the water sector agree that many problems in water management are associated with the governance failure rather than the resource scarcity itself. Even the UN notes that the crisis of water is essentially a crisis of governance. The interconnected nature of the hydrological cycle itself and the influence of multiple actors and sectors in managing water resources at multiple scales makes the governance dimension of water resources what we policy people like to call a wicked problem. For this research, the definition that I adopt for water governance comes from the UN. It entails the range of political, social, economic, and administrative systems that are in place to regulate development and management of water resources and provisions of water services at different levels of society. Water governance is concerned with the institutional arrangements, all the formal and the informal rules and actors. Without getting into too much details, I will list out some of the water resource and governance challenges that India is currently facing. First, the severe threat to water security. A large part of the country and most of its large cities are experiencing extremely high water stress. Second, Indian cities have informal water markets and decentralized interventions in addition to the formal or the municipal water supply and sanitation services. Third, in Indian context, the sheer number and diverse mandate of national, regional, state, and city level actors involved in the management of water resources makes it a complex and a unique situation. Fourth, the urban water sector itself is still a relatively understudied subject in the country. Systematic analysis of urban water governance and empirical studies remain limited. And lastly, in 2016-17, Government of India introduced bills to reform water resource management in the country and in urban areas. That includes new institutional arrangements. However, I believe that without proper understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of the current institutional arrangements, it is difficult to predict the efficacy and effectiveness of the new ones. Hence, in this research, I aim to systematically describe and analyze the institutional arrangements underpinning urban water resource governance in India, and specifically in the case study city of Ahmedabad. I use social network analysis, also called SNA, to do so. I asked 3 research questions. First, which formal institutions are involved in urban water management in India and in Ahmedabad? What are their roles? How are they connected with each other? Second, can the current formal institutional network promote integrated water resource management and sustainable groundwater use? And third, what effects will integrating a new groundwater institutional framework have on the efficacy of Ahmedabad's water governance structure and its potential ability to manage water resources? In this paper, I use social network analysis approach to describe and analyze the water governance structure and institutional arrangements. I will briefly introduce the method and share the synthesis of literature that guides my analysis. So, SNA, or social network analysis, is a systematic approach with a set of well-developed theories and methods to measure and analyze patterns in relations between individuals, groups, or organizations. It is based on theoretical construct of sociology and mathematical foundation of graph theory. SNA became popular to study social connections between individuals using Facebook and Twitter data. It has also been applied to many other fields, including the study of natural resource governance. Here in this image, the black dots represents the nodes or the actors, and the lines that connect them represent the edges or linkages between the nodes. So from network perspective, a study of water governance would mean to map, describe, and analyze the formal and informal interactions between the various actors influencing the water resources management and governance. For instance, it will include mapping the interaction between the national, state, and the local agencies, the community-based organizations, NGOs, private sector, and others. So this is the table in which I summarize the literature review. Here, I synthesize the associations between the S&A metrics and natural resource governance. The S&A metrics can be classified as the properties of the whole network, of nodes, and properties of the edges. Let's look, for example, at degree centrality. So this measurement represents the number of ties or connections that the node or actor possesses. It has a positive effect on an actor's influence. That is, higher the degree centrality, higher the likely influence of the actor on the network. However, there are possible drawbacks as well. Having too many ties can make an actor feel constrained to act or obligated to please all. In this next table, I synthesize the associations between the urban water management objectives, water governance principles, and the S&A metrics. I use these associations to analyze the S&A results and interpret them in context of governance. Let's look at one of the urban water management objectives. For instance, integrated and coordinated management of different water streams. In order to achieve this objective, multiple water governance principles will need to be effectively in place. They may include support for decentralization of power, authority, or information, cultivation of collaboration and engagement across organizational boundaries, participation of stakeholders, etc. These water governance principles, in turn, can be translated to S&A network metrics. For example, a larger network size with diverse stakeholders, higher network density, presence of polycentric structure, cohesive subgroups, strong bridging actors, etc. So when I study the network maps and S&A metrics, I look for these indicators, which then correspond to potential for improvement in governance. So I move on to the methods now. As stated before, I use the city of Ahmedabad as my case study for my doctoral dissertation. Ahmedabad not only represents a typical Indian city, which has rapidly urbanized, it is often portrayed as a success for urban water management. So Gujarat state tops the Composite Water Management Index of Niti Aayog, and Ahmedabad is its largest city with extensive industrial and commercial sectors. Ahmedabad has drastically reduced its dependence on groundwater for municipal and industrial needs, and hence I choose this city. The other city where I conducted fieldwork for comparative analysis was Surat. But for the dissertation, and given the time constraint, I'm limiting my work to a single case study, and hence just focusing on Ahmedabad for now. So the data collection for me focused on identifying the formal actors and describing their formal ties. In the study, formal is what I mean by formal are the codified and the legally adopted political and administrative institutions like the urban local bodies, state agencies, central ministries, government corporation, autonomous bodies, elected representatives, so on and so forth. And the formal ties here, which are also called links or edges in network terms, are the connections between these actors, which are characterized by the primary relationship between them. So I identified formal connections between the actors by their organizational order, their statutory obligations, contractual associations, financial associations, project-based associations, and even voluntary cooperation. So to identify all the various actors and connections between them, I reviewed the policy and the planning documents, the annual reports, the project reports, peer-reviewed journals, right to information, proactive disclosures. And I also conducted 21 semi-structured interviews with local experts, practitioners, government officials to fill in the gaps and triangulate the data that I collected from the secondary sources. The data used in this study reflects the institutional arrangement in 2021-22. Using the data on institutional actors, their attributes, and the patterns in their relationship, I employed a software called Node Excel to conduct computational analysis and generate the network maps. For computational modeling purposes, I categorized each of the institutional actors or nodes based on their jurisdiction, their type, their role in water administration, their domain, the water stream on which they focus on, and the sector that they belong to. And each of the linkages for each of the connection, I also allocated a weight based on the properties of the connection. For example, the vertical hierarchy was identified as a very strong link with a weighted score of 5, whereas voluntary cooperation was considered a weaker link because it was not required, it was voluntary, and it could be present or could be absent. And in such a circumstances, the weight score provided for such relationship was a 2. So these attributes were critical for analyzing the efficacy and the mapping of the network institutions in the network. And the classification of these formal actors and ties was based on the literature, based on the interview, the information that I received from experts, as well as the field observations. At this stage, I would like to highlight the network boundaries and hence the limitations of my study. So recording and implementing the innumerable informal actors involved in the extraction, supply, and use of groundwater, disposal of used water, and stormwater management in Ahmedabad was not feasible in this study. So I acknowledge the presence and importance of informal actors and connections. However, the inclusion of informality in this quantitative SNA approach was outside the scope of my study. Therefore, by focusing only on the formal institutions and relationships, I was only able to construct a partial picture of the institutions involved. Moving on to the results, the first research question. Let's look at the result of the first research questions. What are the different institutions and what are their roles? So I found a total of 350 formal institutions linked through 779 connections that make up the whole urban water governance network. This includes the various national level, regional, state, district, metropolitan, city, zonal, and ward level organizations and individuals that influence the water in one way or the another and the related services. I begin the results and analysis first at the macro level, which encompasses actors operating at a larger spatial and administrative scale. And subsequently, I will dwell into the micro level, examining the city and the actors within the city. So, and I'm also only going to focus on some of the major takeaways given the limited time that we have here. So the first result here, the figure 1A, shows all the nodes and all the linkages in my network. The observation that stands out here particularly is that at national and state levels, water institutions are separate from those for urban development, environment, and climate change. There is no single policy and planning space dedicated to urban water management at these levels. Apparently, this is something that even Professor Saswat Bandyopadhyay also mentioned in his session here at W4W, referring to a research that he and his students did. I think it was for Punjab, don't quote me on that, but he also had the same similar observation and outcome that the institutions are separate for urban planning and water at national and state levels. So my study validates the same using quantitative data. So in the cluster analysis, when we look at figure 1B, Ahmedabad's municipal commissioner and the standing committee emerge as the critical actors. So the municipal commissioner, showed as AMCA node, is the only node that connects the multi-level institution, the national and the state level institutional subgroups, to the city, Ahmedabad Department of Water and the zonal offices. And whereas the standing committee, AMCESC, is the only node that connects the administrative actors and the elected actors in the city. So these two nodes become very critical in the entire network because they're the only one who's communicating the information and transfer of power between the different levels. You can also call them as a bottleneck. So when I focus, this is the second second subset of the research question 1, the results. So when I focus only on the micro scale or the city level network, as shown in the figure 2A, a new insight emerges. There seems to be a presence of an isolated or a disconnected component. All the network nodes are not connected to each other. There is an independent disconnected node. And this is what is the industrial estates. These are the GIDC industrial estates in the city, which are separate from the rest of the city administrative and elected institutional network. Also, the figure 2A highlights the difference in the network structure of administrative and electoral institutions. The network of electoral representatives is predominantly centralized, with the AMC General Board, AMC-EGB, being the central node, whereas the network of the administrative institution is much more decentralized and shows what is called a core and a periphery structure, with AMC Municipal Commissioner being the central core connected to the 3 water departments and delegating the responsibility through the 7 deputy commissioners and zonal offices. So the zonal offices here bring together the peripheral ward offices and act as bridging actors between the ward and the central office. Although the institutional structure of AMC administrative branch is decentralized, with implementation roles delegated to zone and ward offices, most of the water resource and infrastructure related planning, finance, decision-making power remains centralized at the Municipal Commissioner's office. Moving on to the second research question, based on my analysis, I can conclude and suggest that the current institutional arrangement cannot promote what is called the integrated water resource management, or IWRM, or even sustainable groundwater management. I say so because out of 350 current formal institutions in the network, only 6 have the potential and the mandate to lead IWRM. And moreover, if you look at the figure 3A, there are no formal institutions at the zone or the ward level within the city which have the mandate or the jurisdiction to oversee integrated water resource management. With respect to the sustainable groundwater management, at state and national levels, special authorities have been created to oversee groundwater. Therefore, it indicates that groundwater in India is seen as a specialized and technical field. However, the same is not applicable at metropolitan or city scale. The AMC and the ORDA still remain the nodal institutions at city scale. And similar to IWRM, in groundwater also, there is no formal institution at the zone and the ward level, which is responsible for conserving or governing groundwater per se. And lastly, the third research question and the results for that, the final outcome. So the institutional network that I propose in order to improve the current network contains the reforms which are mentioned in the 2016 model bill, which was issued by the central government, and the modifications which are based on the shortcomings that emerged from the analysis of the current institutional network that I conducted. I also fill the gaps that exist in the model bill. For example, the model bill does not explain what is the constitution of a municipal groundwater committee. It doesn't talk about what a ward level groundwater committee should consist of, what should be its role. So I pitch in there, I come up with suggestions based on my analysis. So this is the table. Here is the list of all the potentially new formal institutions with the mandate to govern urban water at various levels. The analysis of the proposed institutional network shows that introduction of new institutions and linkages at strategic positions has the potential to improve network efficacy to govern water resources in Ahmedabad. The table 5 summarizes the SNA metrics for both the current and proposed institutional arrangements. The proposed network performs better on all the key SNA metrics, showing the likelihood to improve governance. The new network has 67 institutions mandated to participate in groundwater governance, or IWRM. This includes the existing 9 ones and the 58 new proposed ones. In the new arrangement, zone and ward level groundwater committees form the lowest level of institutions for collection of information, formation of groundwater protection plans, and to support stakeholder participation. A closer look at only the new institutions and their connections, which are shown in figure 6B, shows that the proposed multi-level institutions and linkages reflect a core and a periphery-like polycentric structure. The state, city, and zonal groundwater management committees make a dense central core, and the ward level groundwater committees bring in the peripheral satellite actors together. Ward groundwater committees form the bridging link between the core and the periphery. In the proposed arrangement, the AMC Commissioner's Office is no longer the only actor bridging the state agencies with the city. Instead, the city-level groundwater committee and the 7 zonal groundwater committees are directly connected to the state-level groundwater advisory council. In this formation, there is much more resilience, and the distribution of power it's distributed among multiple actors. So in conclusion, the new institutional groundwater framework, if introduced in a polycentric structure with multiple institutions and strong bonds among them, can potentially improve the way water resources are governed in Ahmedabad. Let me now highlight some of the challenges, learnings, and the future directions for my research. So the proposed reforms in the current institutional arrangement of water governance in Ahmedabad are rooted in the fundamental principle that decentralization of power to local levels, integration of disconnected sectors, and increased opportunity for participation can improve the management of groundwater resources in the city. This perspective is supported by the global community and India's national water frameworks. However, these approaches may be seen as normative or too ideal in the context of urban water governance. It is also important to recognize that greater participation also comes at a greater cost. Bridging the divide between sectors and encouraging stakeholder participation means bridging together disparate voices. Ahmedabad, like most other Indian cities, has a complex set of water users and providers with often competing priorities. Hence, consensus building can be a time and resource intensive process, potentially slowing down the decision making. In this case study, I have built upon the framework proposed by the national government to design and assess a polycentric arrangement of groundwater institutions. It is important to note that the proposed institutional framework does not aim to dismantle the current system, but rather to only enhance it by leveraging the existing formal institutions and introducing the new ones as mentioned in the bill. However, it is important to clarify that assessing the feasibility itself of these institutions is outside the scope of this study for now. And finally, it is important to acknowledge the challenges faced during the data collection and interview with public officials, as these factors can significantly impact the quality and duration of research work. In the context of this study, Indian public officials were particularly challenging to engage with, and extracting data from them proved to be even more difficult. Despite making multiple attempts to reach out to high-level officials, it became evident to me that their availability for interviews or for reviewing the extensive recall list of institutions that I had was very limited. So the new research that I think can focus on testing the proof of concept of a ward-level groundwater committee in Ahmedabad. Such studies on institutional arrangements and participation would be best suited for the ward level, and SNA could be incorporated into both the formative and the summative evaluation process. By doing so, the SNA metrics for Ahmedabad's water governance institutional network could be validated using the primary evidence collected from the field. And in conclusion, I want to leave you with 2 insights. That's all. The rest you can forget. But the 2 things that I want you to remember is that 1, by combining social network analysis metrics with qualitative analysis, it was possible to reveal deficiencies in institutional arrangements. It can also point out toward the types of reform that are likely to be effective. SNA proved to be a very helpful assessment and mapping tool. And 2, SNA alone cannot fully capture the intricacies of water planning, policy, and politics. However, similar to this study, SNA can be considered along with the qualitative analysis of water governance. So I want to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer your questions and receive comments. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Vaishali. I observed that you looked at your watch at the beginning and then at the end, and your entire demeanor just says how methodical your research is, and the deep thinking that you are putting in, and for this very practical takeaways from the research is so very important, because sometimes research just stays in boxes. So yes, congratulations for that, and all the best to you for your PhD defense. Yes, so if I can come up with a question, and I think, it'll help to have your presentation there because it was so detailed and it has so much information that if we don't have if you don't have it on, it may not be completely clear as to what I'm referring to. So the first thing that struck me is, in the initial slide, you have mentioned something very interesting, a wicked problem. So, and you have showed how all the wicked problems are connected to each other, right? And I was got me to wonder, and you can, since you've got to such deep analysis and observations, can this apply to water supply and water disposal networks too, that everything is connected to each other? Can that happen, and can that help?
Yes, that is correct, Sonia ji. You're right that wicked problems are often the problems which are interconnected and they are dynamic in nature. So when one changes, its likely impact on other is changing. And there is no way you can solve one without the other. And most of our environmental problems and water problems are that way dynamic, complex, and interconnected. So the long story short, the answer is yes. The same methodology can be applied specifically to just wastewater treatment network, the agencies and people involved in that, or in stormwater, or a mix of all. So it depends upon the problem definition of the researcher. But some people, there is one study, most likely in Bangalore, in which a group of scholars have used social network analysis to study the wastewater treatment within the city, and they have applied it there. So yes, there are different scales at which this method can be applied and in different problem contexts as well.
Right. Now, another thing that I was wondering is that you have spoken, you have given us a definition of SNA, social network analysis, but perhaps a little elaboration would help because that is not something that everybody on this platform would be very, very conversant with. So, what is it really? Because the moment we say social network, then our brains are thinking in a different way. So if you could just elaborate a bit on what is this? Yes, please.
Yeah, sure. So the entire the theory and the science and the math behind social network analysis emerged actually just to study the social connection between the people. So so as just the name says, for instance, I know Sonia, Sonia knows Ekta, we all know Mansi. So if I just map this out, that Vaishali is one node, each of us is a single node. So there are 4 nodes, and each of us are connected to Mansi, but I don't know Ekta personally. I recently came to know Sonia. And if I put this mathematically with strong connection to Mansi, no connection between Vaishali and Ekta, a weak connection between Vaishali and Sonia, this is it. This is called social network mapping. What does it do? By doing that, we can understand the influence of one actor over the other. Even within this small network of 4 individuals, we know Mansi is most important because Mansi is the only one who's connected to all 3 of us. Any information that comes to Mansi is likely to get translated to all of us. But if Ekta knows something, the only way I can know is if it is transferred via Mansi. So what this does is that by mapping the actors and their connections, we can understand the possible impact of the way information can be disseminated, and thereby how to improve coordination, how the things would be governed. And then later on, this entire mathematical graph theory started being applied to various fields because researchers like to look for innovative methods to solve the same old problems. So we started looking in the social sciences field as well. We started applying network science from electricity network, for instance, how the transmission line works, or how even the railway line works. There has been some work. Northeastern has one of the best network sciences labs in the world. Our professor called Professor Barabasi was the most prominent researcher when it came to COVID, because the spread of COVID itself was social network. How was COVID spreading between the different countries was studies using network analysis. The Indian railway system has been studied using social network analysis, that if you take out one specific godforsaken station, the railway system can come down. It doesn't have to be Mumbai or Delhi, because these are the weak and sole linkages. So this is very exciting, and it has been applied for natural resources as well. So I based my research in the literature of the natural resource governance and application of social network analysis there. So I draw all the metrics that I've shown here in the table from all these giants on whose shoulder I stand and my research stands, is that they have already worked in empirical studies and made these connections between the various matrices and their likelihood impact on natural resource governance. And I extend it to water governance then. Thank you. I hope I clarify what it is.
Absolutely. That was such a wonderful explanation with the examples. I mean, you're a born teacher. It was great. Yes. I think Mansi probably wants to chip in here. Yes, Mansi.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thanks for the wonderful presentation, Vaishali and Sonia, to take it further. I have a question on your network analysis itself, and I actually want to chip in because you put my role in the whole network we have in the water governance in country. And when we look at the different SNA network options, where we talk about monocentric, when we talk about centric options or polycentricity, as we talk about it, and even we talk about hierarchical way of doing things, and even constellations of different networks. Often it is noticed that the nodes are extremely important, whether they are centralized nodes or decentralized nodes. But when we look at water governance, when we look at water governance per se in our country, so we just focus in our case here. My experience during my PhD really told that the way we perceive polycentricity theoretically, it is actually not even that on the ground. There is some kind of dispersed, or you call it actually distributed in your own option of Baran. But when you have a dispersed system, which is a little bit different than distributed, because in distributed, theoretically, it is showing that everyone is connected to everyone. But when we look at the fourth option, we find that there are some organizations which do have a stronghold in, let's say I was working on lakes. They are somehow on their own. For example, the classic example is the consultants, architecture and planning consultants. And I'm bringing it example from my own background. How do you think that if we can really theorize that option in the SNA approach? Do you think that you can really develop a new model from these three models which are available?
Yes, Mansi, you're correct. And I think the answer is yes, that the more we do the empirical work, right, the more networks and arrangements, if you're able to study using SNA, the more information and data we will have, that which are the networks which are affecting. They might be disparate, distributed, or dispersed, but they are still working. And why are they working? So there is a requirement of research in these cases and connecting it back to the SNA metrics. So SNA in governance, and especially in the environmental governance field, is still an emerging field. So every paper that gets done or that brings some learning from field back to a network metrics is a contribution, a theoretical contribution to the field. Having said that, the important part, I think, in such organizations, and as you said, consultants pretty much working independently and often doing good job, is that there are often bridging actors. There might be one or two, or the consultant itself would be the node connecting actor between the national organization, between the policy planning or the project funding that they are receiving and implementing it in the field or with other stakeholders. So they do become the critical bridging actor in such a relationship. So it often depends upon also what is the boundary of your network. If you want to say, I'm only looking at the scale where the network cuts at the consultant, then there is no way you are studying how the consultant himself or herself is connected to the various actors in the field. So just these two things, that yes, depending upon the scale, it can be included. In such cases, bridging actors are the key to understanding the flow of information. Often there can be like, for example, there is a paper in which the African villages have been studied and how do they manage land and water resources. And what that research paper found out was that all these villages are independent. They don't work together the way you said, very dispersed and independent on their own. But when they look deeper into the informal ties, often the village leaders were somehow communicating or connected. So they would translate that, oh, a new funding or a new work has come or an NGO in the field has come, talk to them. So there would have been some informal information exchange that happened that sort of capacity build the next village or any other village in the network. So I think it's about digging deeper and how much is the extent of your research question and boundaries.
Yeah, thanks. I asked this question because you were talking about the flow of information, which becomes extremely critical in governance. I call it the first pillar of governance. Yes. And when I'm taking example of this actor as consultant, in my PhD, I found that becomes the biggest blockage of flow of information. Because,
yes.
And I'm talking from the ground. I'm not talking.
Yes. You're right. You're absolutely right, Mansi. So what happens here, one of the ways at least I can explain what I have done is that is why there is so much of classification, because I'm not just saying node, I'm also trying to say the quality of the node. So for now, it is only a formal network. So I only have predominantly the government institutions, administrative and electoral boards. But when I expand it, let's say I do another project at ward level and I'm covering everyone, including the consultant, the quality of the network, the way I will define the connection, they might be just a dead end when it comes to information. So when I plot my graph, for instance, here, you can see on this side, I also have, based on the qualities or the characteristics of my nodes, I can also graphically and visually distinguish them, that what are they? So I can actually make consultants a black hole. So what happens is the SNA will give you this ability to classify a certain node and their ability to transfer information, and you can characterize them and translate that information qualitatively also. So SNA on its own, as I said, quantitatively could be just nothing. The interpretation is what that matters. This is data analytics. The field is up and coming about data analytics, but data does not make sense unless the person who is reading it and interpreting it understands the context and is able to bring value to that information. So SNA is the same. I can use that.
Just a tiny question, sorry.
No, go ahead. This is what we are here for.
How do you place a self-organization network here? Because I mean, we both are Ostrom scholars. You have worked or also studied Ostrom heavily, and so we can say like that. And she spent her whole life doing self-organization. So if we have to put an SNN system into self-organizing, let's say, irrigation system of Nepal, which she has really dedicated her life. Do you think we can plot that? And I was referring it to your Africa example, So
Yes, you can. And there have been papers, there have been studies. Thanks to the Nepal example, there have been studies in fisheries as well. For instance, some of the most seminal work in SNA.
IFPRI studies on forest.
Yes, exactly. And they have been done on land and for land and water. Integrated management on fisheries, and they all have been from the Ostrom school of thought, and they have looked at emergence of a network, the self-organizing network. So what you can do is, for instance, in this case, I am studying as, the 2016 model bill as the treatment. You can have a pre-test and post-test. So in Ostrom or self-organizing, people often do a longitudinal study of networks, and you can look at what existed at time X, then X plus T, X plus 2T. So at time, how the connection varies, and just the analysis of that itself, along with the fieldwork and qualitative information, these are the gem of the papers. In fact, from there comes most of the understanding of metrics between SNA and the governance. So yes, it's very much possible. You can define your nodes or actors can be anyone that you choose to be. Institutions, individuals, combination of both, self-organizing institutional, government institutions, anything. It's just a methodology in which different elements can be placed as nodes.
I hope you bring it to Indian water governance, and also even advance it to the Hojo manual, which Japan is using, by the way. So you may like to learn that and go for a visiting scholarship to do the Hojo manual, I say exchange scholarship. So maybe I will connect you to some people.
I would love
I also
to.
did that.
Thank
I also
you. I would
did
love
that, but
to.
I could not learn in 1 year, the Hojo manual. So maybe you can go a step further and do that. And they are
I
using
will try my
extensively
best.
for water management. So thank you so much, and over to you, Sonia.
Thanks, Mansi. Yes, so I'm just wondering, since we're talking about a network, you brought up something about weak and strong ties. And when we just read it in English, it's not that weak ties are actually weak, because depending on who the players are, or on which side the power is going to, it can mean different things. So can we have a little elaboration on that?
Yes.
Yes, Vaishali.
Thank you. Thank you, Sonia. You're absolutely correct that one, the connection itself are dynamic. They often change and evolve. So there is no permanent quality of connection at all given times between the actor. That is a fact. And also, it's a qualitative relationship. How do you quantify it? So often economists and quantifying modelers like me, we like to then make some assumptions and simplify a complex qualitative thing into a more determinant quantitative information. So you can say that in this case, I have made those assumptions that whatever is available in the literature. So either I have to find that information in literature, or through interviews, I have been informed of a quality of a relationship, or I have observed myself in the field during the field work, during the interviews. So I base my qualification and classification of these network property based on what I know and what I can prove that I know. So, and hence when I say strong and weak and absent, for instance, let's say the very weak connection of numerical value 1 is given for the cooperation between the corporators or the elected officials and the administrative and the municipal corporations, ward office, or engineers. So this often, even in literature and in fieldwork and in interview, the thing that came up again and again was that they don't necessarily work together. Elected officials have their own purview of power and dominance. And water is often seen as a technical issue, which the city engineer, the civil engineer will solve wherever it is a broken pipe, or access to water, or the pressure is not enough. It is the lowest level ward lineman or the civil engineer who's going to do it. And they don't necessarily talk to each other or listen to each other, because the administrators report to the administrative branch, and the elected officials are separate. So because of the separation of executive and the political branch, this was defined or sort of identified as a love-hate, mostly hate-hate relationship, and don't want to work together relationship. And that's why then I said, let me give this a weak link, because if I'm saying that these people need to come together and be able to talk to each other, to be able to even just bring the information, how many groundwater borewells are there in our ward, who all is using how much, this all itself needs cooperation. These all varied people have to come together. And hence I say this is weak, this needs to be strengthened. And that's hence the qualification. This is the reason that has gone behind classifying each and every of over 800 connections qualitatively.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that. I'm also wondering that, you have talked about, and I think, Vaishali, if you wish, you can stop sharing the screen now. I mean, I think we're done with specific references. So I'm just thinking, because you have, and correct me if I'm wrong, you have mentioned that there could be new organizations being introduced. And I was wondering that is it possible that you strengthen networks between organizations rather than introduce new organizations? Is that also a way of thinking? Yeah.
Yes, that is definitely a better way of thinking, I would personally say, because there are existing ward committees, even in Ahmedabad. They are not very effective. I think Kerala has one of the most effective ward committees, where they do have both financial power and jurisdiction to be able to do local planning. There is much more decentralization at urban governance there. In Ahmedabad, no. They exist on paper where the corporators and the engineers meet at ward. But so the problem here is that these ward committees have not been mandated to look after natural water resources or energy or any other sector. They just look for grievances and how the money is being done and any proposal that needs to be taken then to the standing committee. So the answer is yes, if they have their roles have been redefined, they have been given both jurisdiction and legal power to do so, then yes, the existing institutional network itself can be expanded in the way it is defined, their roles are defined, the financial powers is given to them, then the existing ward committees can do everything. But often what I realized is that most of these actors which are present are already stretched too far too thin. So if I talk to the AMC officials, they are just overwhelmed with firefighting and doing their everyday roles and responsibilities. So they do not foresee themselves planning for a greener or a better, management or governance. So if their duties itself is not defined in their role, they cannot be expected to do so. So that's my response here, that if we change the role or if we hire new people, we capacity build the existing cadre, then yes, it can be done. And why I did entirely new institutional arrangement is because as a researcher, I needed an entry point. I needed to take a policy intervention and study its potential weaknesses and strengths. And hence I took the 2016 model bill as a sure shot document where a new reform was mentioned. And that's where I stopped. But yes, it can be done for the same as well.
Right. Yeah, and I can't resist but ask you this one question, and probably this will be maybe the last one because we are nearing the time. So that is, what is your observation of vested interests in centralized water supply systems, and what would be the obstacles that you envisage? Because you've already talked about the challenges and you've said exclusion of informal players as one of them. So yeah. Linked with that, how would you look at this, the obstacles they pose for adequate governance? And governance is one of the key points. Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very interesting question, Sonia. I'm going to wear my civil engineering hat now and answer this because centralized solution is something that civil engineers love to do. So the civil engineers and the water resource engineers, we are trained in the traditional way of problem solving and engineering design, which meant for us, get the clean water in the city and get the used water out of the city. Do this as fast as possible and in the most invisible way as possible. Do not let the people know where they get the water from or where the dirty water goes. So that's me. That's the previous me, the civil engineer trained as water resource engineer. And when you do this centralized way of planning, designing, and implementation, much of the information and power stays in the technical realm with the civil engineers, with the city executive branch. And then when you talk about governance from Ostrom's perspective, from the common pool resources perspective, as water as a resource which is shared by multiple stakeholders within the city, it's no longer just a municipal utility service. It's a resource which is accessed by people who have access to groundwater, by everyone who have access to an open drain. So, but this is not reflected in the approach of centralization. And hence, I think there is a need to open up the space, the way we view water itself. And rather than just a technical challenge or a technical subject, it needs to be seen as a social, ecological, and technical subject. Absolutely. Only when we are able to do that both at the policy level and then be able to train our engineers, planners, economists, social scientists, and conservationists to work together and see as across a common across the board. That is what will open up the debate and the platform for everyone to bring in the information that they have. So.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much. That was such a robust response to my query. Yes. Do we have any other questions, Ekta? I think Mansi is also coming up with something else also. But yes, do we have any other questions, or then we can draw this to a close? Yes, Ekta, please.
Yeah, I have a question. As we all are discussing about the networks, centralized and distributed networks, so I feel that centralized network, there are two more networks. One is the hierarchical and the hybrid model. So basically, in the hierarchical model, there is a sort of authority and then the going level down, down, down. So there becomes so many personal issues, ego issues, and so on. So in the centralized system also, there can be the issues like this. Because in the centralized system, only the main person has the authority and the knowledge. So which cannot be distributed equally to all so that all can take the action. And similarly, if in the distributed system, though if whole knowledge is, all the information is distributed to all, then that can also be a dangerous to the whole system. So can we define the roles and responsibility as we talk about this thing, that the roles and responsibilities should be defined at the every level, so that there should not be any conflict between these ego and proper distribution. So this is the major thing. So we can't just rely on this. We can't say that the centralized system is the best or the hybrid is best, and it should be changing as per the requirement of the time. Okay, and if we talk about the nodes, we are talking about the NGOs, but there are so many individuals nowadays. People are working on this, the self, that they have their own model. Even the individuals have their own models. They have their self-sustainable models that they don't need water, electricity, and all from the outside world. So this type of nodes are also coming up. So if we work on the network, so according to you, how would you suggest centralized, decentralized, hybrid, and how this hierarchy should be defined step by step? Or should it be defined, redefined after some time frames so that we can improve the system?
Yes. So Ekta, thank you. You brought in a very important point. I would say that there is, for every organizational structure that has evolved in public administration domain over the decades, has some purpose or the other. When they were designed, they were with all the good intention. When you say hierarchical structure, it was supposed to be top-down distribution of decisions, and the planning has to, it's supposed to be one of the most effective administrative structures because it goes from top to down and the information goes from bottom to up. So perfect. But now that the world is changing, the way interconnectedness is increasing in the world, and for most of the problems, the silo thinking and the vertical hierarchical is failing us. So you're right that when the time comes, when the problems evolve with time, so should be the organizational structure as well. Now, but what happens is in reality that organization is nothing but individuals and people, and there is always a power struggle. For example, from my own observations and interviews that I conducted in AMC and ORDA, yes, there are two city civil engineers which are part of two parallel water departments under ORDA. They both, are answerable to the commissioner, but they themselves may or may not get together because they both are competing civil engineers at the same position, most likely up for a promotion. So there is organizational roles, which you say are right, that we can define them, we can evolve them, but then there are individuals also who carry on that responsibility. Can we control how do they interpret it? How do they act upon it? Maybe not. We can keep trying by capacity building and constantly engaging with them. I think that is something that we lack in Indian institutional systems, is that there is very limited regular training and capacity building of our administrative and executive branches. And if that can be brought in, maybe their horizons and their thinking can be expanded the way we are discussing here. So there was definitely some interest from them. They were more than happy to, talk to me unofficially, but officially their hands were tied. They're like, we can't do this. We don't want to do this. Why will we do this? It's not part of our job. So make it part of their job. And then things would be different. But thank you for your question, Ekta. No perfect solution, depending upon the problem, depending upon the condition. I think it needs to evolve. And as researchers, we can only study them, record them, understand them, and bring out the lessons and share the best practices.
Exactly. I understand that there cannot be any perfect system. So system has to be evolved step by step as per the requirements and as the time change. So, but the problem is that we are not working on this thing that how all the system can be aware that there is some problem. Actually, people are not realizing that there is a problem. Everybody is okay with the way the things are going on. So we daily met a lot of people, a lot of officials who say that, sorry, we can't do it. Because
status quo is the best solution. Status quo is the best solution. Status quo.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's correct.
So
there is something called Ekta. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's okay. Please carry on, Vaishali. You're the star.
No, sorry. No, I was just going to add, I realized that there is something called adaptive governance. That's the new and upcoming way of describing that governance, and the structure itself should keep evolving based on the condition, because climate change has now given even much more, crisis to deal with. So the new term in governance and is not just polycentric governance, but also what is called the adaptive governance, that the people, the actors, and the connection itself should keep on adapting based on the circumstances. So what we were talking, there is a scholarly term now, adaptive governance, for that.
Yeah.
Right. So we are coming to a close, Ekta. We could ask participants, right, to unmute and ask if there are any questions, anything to discuss.
Yes.
With Vaishali.
They can send their...
Yes. And also
they can unmute themselves.
People unmute themselves. Yes, that is correct. I believe there are many people also watching on YouTube. And maybe we can ask for their comments in YouTube. Yeah. So, yes. If not, then we will bring this to a close. It's past 6 months. What do you say? Should we draw it to a close? Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead.
Yes. Yes, Ekta. Yes, Ekta, you can conclude the session. Yes.
So it's a wonderful session, and talking about the governance and the roles and responsibilities of all the actors, and how this network can be more strong and all. So the final conclusion is the network can be strong only if we keep evolving it, and we should accept the faults as well as the drawbacks. So only then we can improve it. So thank you, Vaishali, for bringing in this session with us and sharing your knowledge and your research, so that we all can think about it, that and at least the officials, the people who are involved in this whole system, they should think about it, that there are things that needs to be managed by discussion as well as sharing their responsibilities, roles, and redefining roles and responsibility, actually. So it should be done on a regular periodic basis. So only then we can create a exact system that can help the people as well as the whole environment. So it's time to say bye today, but we will be back with another sessions. So please join us for next Friday water session. We invite you to Water Arts on August 25th at 5 p.m. on Edible Arts, a fish with a long tail with Parag Tandal. The link to join the session is in the chat box. So please go ahead. In a forthcoming Wednesday for water session on August 23, 2023 at 5 p.m. Do join the discussion on Himalayan waters, development and disaster. Please register us with the given link at the chat box, and also visit us at www.w4w.in for the further information and the details. Also, don't forget to join us on every third Friday for the water thesis session to appreciate the scholars and their research and to motivate them to do more research that can help to sustainable systems for the greener, happier tomorrow, I can say. Yeah. So thank you, Mansi. Thank you, Sonia. And thanks a lot, Vaishali, for this knowledge sharing with us.